The breaking news tonight, Iran says an IRGC official was assassinated in Tehran by two gunmen on two motorcycles. Details are still sketchy. I-24 News, Ariel Saran is here with me. What do we know, Ariel, and what do we don't?
Right. Good evening, Jacob. Not such a good evening if you're a member of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Quds Force, where they're reporting that another one of their high-ranking officials was assassinated in broad daylight in downtown Tehran. Now, according to reports by state-owned media, two assailants on two motorcycles fired at least 5 shots at the Colonel Hassan Sayyad Khodai. He was in the Quds Force that belongs to the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. They're the branch that is responsible for exporting the revolution, the Islamic revolution across the world. He is believed to have operated in Syria and Iraq. He is also believed to have just returned from Syria. And so as he was about to enter his home in the eastern part of the capital, these two gunmen opened fire and killed him. His wife was the first person to find him. Now, according to the IRGC, who confirmed this, there's a manhunt underway to find the two gunmen. Now, the reports of this killing described Khodai as a, quote, defender of the shrine. That's a reference to Iranians who fight against the Islamic State in Syria. He's also believed to have been a former aide of the late head of the Quds Force, Qasem Soleimani, and so there's a lot of speculation as to who is behind this. It's we should tread carefully here because these kinds of operations are carried out across the world. But if we look at the MO, motorcyclists either shooting someone in a car or planting an explosive device on a moving vehicle, this is something that has been attributed in the past to the Israeli Mossad, and so I wouldn't fall out of my seat if we learn that that's the case.
And they don't blame Israel now directly, the Iranians, but there's a hint in their message that may direct the blame to Israel.
Exactly. So as this news of this assassination came out, the same state-owned media, Tasnim news agency, reported of what they called a network of thugs tied to the Zionist intelligence services, that they were caught pretty much simultaneously. Now, they're not tying it to this attack, but it's interesting that they're not saying that these were Zionists. It's a network that was run by the Israeli intelligence authorities. Their aim of this network was to steal, destroy property, or even kidnap people belonging to the Islamic Revolutionary Guards. Their intelligence unit was able to uncover this, and just the close proximity of these two reports indicates that it's probably an attempt to save face in what would appear to be a pretty big blow to the Islamic Revolutionary Guards in the streets of Tehran.
Well, thank you. Stay for more with us. Now we are turning to Professor Chuck Freilich, former Israeli Deputy National Security Advisor. Good evening to you. As Ariel mentioned, the MO looks familiar to you as well?
Yeah, I mean, there is an ongoing war between both sides, conducting various operations, kinetic operations, cyber operations, sometimes focused more on the nuclear program, some, as appears to be the case from the initial reports, this time maybe more to do with Iranian influence in Syria, their attempts to build up their presence there. But in any event, of course, I obviously have no knowledge of this particular incident, but it looks like the type of ongoing conflict between the two sides.
And just for context, the Iranians are pretty active in Syria, and so is Israel, mainly by Israeli Air Force.
Correct, but not just the Air Force. I would imagine that there are a variety of other means being taken. But I think the bigger issue for us to look at here isn't just the details of this attack, but the fact that we are at a really critical moment in the negotiations regarding the nuclear deal, the JCPOA. And if it looks like it's been going on for months, but it looks like either a decision is going to have to be made, we're reaching a deal, or not, I very, very much hope that we can find a way to go back to the deal. Because just through a simple process of elimination, if you look at the different options that are available to Israel, going back to the deal with all of its faults, I believe is by far the best of the bad options. To the point that I even came out recently in a couple of op-eds, and I said that if necessary, obviously this isn't something that I would like to do, but if necessary, as the final concession that will have to be made to reach a deal, if the U.S. has to take the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, off the terror list, not the Quds Force, which is really the terrorist element within the Revolutionary Guards, then that's a price worth paying, because actually the difference is really symbolic. The Quds Force was first designated as a terrorist organization in 2010. The Trump administration added the entire Revolutionary Guards in 2017. In point of fact, that was a symbolic act, which hardly changes anything in reality. And so if the price of going back to the deal is removing this symbolic act, as unpleasant as it is, I believe it's worth doing.
Mm-hmm. Now, you alluded to the shadow war between Iran and Israel. That has been going on for a long time now, right?
Decades. I've had the dubious pleasure of dealing with the Iranian challenge for over 30 years now, much of that while I was still in government and since then. The Iranians adopted a decades-long, even multi-generational approach towards the conflict with Israel. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, they correctly, from their point of view, correctly identified our home front, the civilian population, as Israel's weak point. They came to the conclusion that they couldn't defeat us in a war. And so they adopted this decades-long approach that I call attrition until destruction. Israel's destruction is the long-term objective. And from their perspective, if it takes them decades, then that's fine. And so, yes, there's this ongoing shadow war, as you're calling it. Some of it is in the shadows, some of it isn't quite in the shadows. And if we've been forced into taking a long-term approach also, I'm not convinced that we've sufficiently formulated a comprehensive strategy for doing that. But Israel has to play a long-term, decades-long game as well.
Yeah, and there's always the question of will the Iranians react, retaliate, and how? We're going to see this question coming up again now.
There's always that question, whether it's the Iranians or anyone else. When you take offensive action, you have to be prepared for the other side to respond, sometimes even when you're taking defensive action. We've done very well so far in preventing Iranian retaliation. They haven't been very successful in responding to an endless number of attacks that have been attributed to Israel. I presume that whoever did this one also took into account what has to be done, but there are no guarantees.